you're thinking about taking a screenshot or mocking the image you're about to see, don't. At a museum in Key West, there are thousands of letters. Letters from people who lost everything. Their careers, their families, and even their sanity. All because they crossed a 3-foot hulk of fabric. They call him Robert. But the woman behind the glass that night called him something else. A host. And this is why you should never look Robert in the eye without asking for permission. In the early years of the 20th century, Key West still smelled of salt and damp wood. Night winds slipped through narrow balconies, like whispers from somewhere else. The Otto family home on Eaton Street stood still, like a pale and silent monument beneath the tropical sun. People called it a beautiful house, elegant and fitting for a family of standing. But those who had lived in that town long enough knew an unwritten rule. The loveliest houses usually hid the things that most wanted to remain unseen. Eugene Robert Otto, the boy everyone called Gene, received the doll on a sweltering afternoon. Cicadas screamed in the yard. It did not look like any toy he had owned before. It was nearly the size of a small child. Cloth body, stiff face, faded blonde hair, and black button-like eyes that somehow seemed deeper than they should have been. Its sailor suit was sewn with such care, break time equals 0. 3s/, that it felt as though the maker had spent far too much time on it, perfecting something that should never have been made so carefully. People said the doll was a gift from a servant who worked in the Otto household. Others said it was not exactly a gift, but something left behind, like a reminder. The servant was a quiet woman with lowered eyes and hands rough from labor, yet remarkably deft with needle and thread. She did not look at people often, except sometimes at Gene, with a strange expression that was neither affection nor resentment, something closer to curiosity, as if she were wondering whether the boy was innocent enough to open a door the grown-ups did not even know was there. Gene loved the doll immediately. He named it Robert, giving it his own middle name, as though he were sharing a piece of himself. From that day on, Robert sat beside him at breakfast, stayed near his bed while he slept, and listened to the childish stories Gene told about ships, distant islands, and dark waters under moonlight. His parents thought it was only natural, the ordinary attachment of a lonely child to his favorite toy. What they did not know was that Gene was speaking to the doll, as though it were a real friend. And worse, on certain evenings, as they passed the room upstairs, the adults sometimes heard another voice answering him. At first, they told themselves it was just Gene pretending. Children changed their voices when they played alone. Children imagined things. Children did strange things and forgot them when they grew older. But some things in that house refused to stay inside the safe boundaries of easy explanations. One night, when Jean was only 10 years old, he woke in the dark, with the feeling that someone was watching him. The air in the room had turned thick, hot and cold at the same time, deeply unnatural, as if the window had been opened to let in the ocean breeze, while all the living warmth had somehow been drained from the room. He sat up and saw Robert sitting at the foot of the bed. Not on the wooden chair where Jean always placed him before sleep. Not on the floor. Not propped against the wall. The doll was sitting directly at the foot of the bed. Motionless. Cloth legs stretched out. Face turned toward him. In the bluish-gray darkness. Jean did not scream right away. He only stared, his mind struggling to choose between two possibilities. Either he was not fully awake, or the thing before him was no longer a toy. Then the room exploded with sound, with scraping violently across the floor, something heavy crashing over. A chair dragged, blows landing one after another, as though some furious creature were tearing the room apart. Jean's scream split the house in two. His mother was the first to run up the stairs. She heard her son crying for help, heard furniture overturning, heard something like fingernails scratching against the wall. Jean's bedroom door was locked from the inside. It took several frantic seconds for her to wrench it open. The moment the door flew wide, every sound stopped. Jean was curled up on the bed, knees pulled tight against his chest, face drained white, mouth open, but no words coming out. The room looked as though a large wild animal had torn through it. A chair lay broken on its side. Books scattered across the floor. A framed picture had crashed from the wall, its glass shattered into glittering fragments beneath the oil lamp. And at the foot of the bed, Robert still sat there, perfectly still, perfectly silent, as if he had never moved at all. Jean could barely speak for hours afterward. And when he finally managed a few broken words, he repeated only one thing. Robert did it. Robert did that. His parents were furious. They scolded him for his sick imagination. They cleaned the room, put the doll back in the chair, and tried to force the night into nothing more than an embarrassing family memory, never to be discussed again. But adults often mistake silence for disappearance. From that night on, the house began to change. The servants heard Jean talking upstairs, laughing and chattering to himself. Followed, a few seconds later, by a second voice. Lower, drier, not at all the voice of a child. Once, Jean's mother stood in the hallway and clearly heard a conversation inside his room. One voice belonged to her son. The other could not have. It was not loud. Break time equals 0. 5s/. But every word seemed to drag ever so slightly at the end, like a thin breath passing under a door. She opened the room and found only Jean, seated on the floor with Robert in front of him, his small hands resting on the doll's knees, as though he were listening intently to someone finishing a thought. "Who are you talking to?" she asked. Jean looked up and answered naturally, "Robert." "No," she said. "I'm asking who's answering you." For the first time in his life, Jean did not look his mother in the eye. He only smoothed the wrinkled sailor suit on the doll and said softly, "You know." There were days when people in the house found Robert somewhere he had not been left. They placed him in an armchair, and hours later found him sitting at the top of the stairs. Someone saw him facing the upstairs window, as though he were looking out toward the sea, even though no one admitted to moving him. A young maid quit break time equals 0. 3s/. After swearing, she saw the doll dart across the end of the hallway at midnight. Low and small like a child, but far too fast. The gardener claimed he looked up and saw a pale cloth face staring down from the upstairs window, while Jean was out in town with his father. But what frightened Jean's parents most were not the stories. It was that now and then, in the half-light of late afternoon, Robert's expression seemed to change. No one could explain exactly what they saw, only that sometimes the crudely stitched mouth looked as if it had lifted slightly. The dead stare seemed suddenly intent, as though listening. The blank cloth face took on a hint of satisfaction, or irritation, or expectation. Only for an instant, then it was gone. But once someone had seen it, they could never again look at the doll the same way. Jean grew up with Robert, the way a person grows up with a shadow that refuses to leave his feet. Friends who came to the house never liked the doll. Some laughed and said it gave them the creeps. Others never returned. Jean did not care. He never explained Robert, and he never tolerated anyone mocking him. If anyone asked, he would only say that Robert disliked being stared at. Once, after a neighborhood boy carelessly tossed Robert onto a chair and laughed, the boy fell down the back steps later that same day and broke his wrist. The adults called it an accident. Jean said nothing. He only sat by the window holding Robert, while rain struck the dirt road outside. His face so strange and distant that his mother began to fear her own son. Time passed. Jean's parents died one after the other. The Eaton Street house eventually became his. By then he was a grown man, an artist with a mind full of color, shape, and private obsessions. He married a gentle woman, but not a foolish one. From the first day she entered that house as its new mistress, she sensed something was wrong. Not exactly with the house, with the way Jean spoke about Robert. He did not speak about the doll as though it were an old keepsake from childhood. He wondered whether Robert had been placed comfortably. He worried whether the room might be too warm for Robert. Sometimes, in the middle of speaking to Anne, he would stop and glance toward the stairs. as though he had just heard someone calling from above. On the first night after their wedding, and woke to find Jean gone from bed, she followed the dim glow of lamplight into the hallway and stopped outside a small upstairs room. The door was slightly open. Jean sat inside in the dark, and Robert sat across from him in a chair. Neither moved, neither spoke, but the way Jean held himself, straight-backed, head slightly tilted, as if listening, made and unable to step any closer. From that point on, she hated the doll, not with the fear of a child frightened by something ugly, but with the instinct of a woman who realizes there is something in her home, quietly occupying a space meant for marriage, for privacy, and for her husband's own mind. Every time Anne suggested putting Robert away somewhere, Jean became sharp. Sharp in a way that did not sound like him at all. He said Robert needed a room of his own. He said Robert did not like being forgotten. In the end, to calm his wife, Jean agreed to move Robert up to the attic. On the very first night after the attic door was locked, and heard footsteps overhead, slow, even, dragging slightly, like the tired steps of a child, pacing across old boards. She shook Jean awake. He opened his eyes, listened, and then sat very still in the darkness. The footsteps continued, then stopped. Then, a few seconds later, came a faint little giggle, far away, muffled behind layers of wood, and grabbed her husband's hand. It was ice cold. The next morning, Jean unlocked the attic to check. Robert was still there, propped against an old trunk, but there was a streak through the dust across the doll's knees, as if someone had picked him up and set him back down. Jean said nothing about it. He only closed the door and locked it more carefully. It should have ended there. Instead, the neighborhood children began saying something strange. Every morning on their way to school, they saw Robert sitting in the upstairs window, looking out at the street. One child insisted that when they pointed and laughed, the doll tilted its head, moved its mouth, break time equals 0, 5s/, as though mocking them. A little girl ran home in tears. She said she had heard a grown man's laugh, coming from that window, while the doll sat there alone. Jean was furious. He insisted the children were lying. He knew Robert was locked in the attic. But when he went upstairs to check the bedroom window room, he opened the door and felt the blood turn cold inside him. Robert was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, still, facing the street. Jean carried him back to the attic, locked the door, checked the latch twice. But a week later, Anne screamed for her husband when she saw the silhouette of a small child rocking beside the upstairs window. And again, Robert was there. It happened so many times that eventually Jean stopped getting angry. He just fell silent. The silence in the house grew heavier and heavier, like damp dust settling over the walls, and began to sleep badly. Sometimes she woke with the feeling that someone was standing at the foot of the bed, watching her. Each time she lit the lamp, there was nothing there but the motionless dark. But one night she swore she heard a low, rasping voice whisper from the hallway, "Break time equals 1. 2s/. You do not belong here." She never told Gene. Deep down, she knew he would not fully deny. He had heard something like that himself. Gene died in 1974, leaving behind a house full of paintings, old oil paint, and things no one wanted to explain. When a new owner moved in, they had a 10-year-old daughter. The little girl found Robert in the attic, the way children discover treasure in old houses. At first she was thrilled. She called him the house secret. She begged to keep him in her bedroom. Her parents agreed, because to them, he was nothing more than an old doll left behind by the previous owners. The excitement did not last. Within the first week, the girl began waking in the middle of the night, screaming. She said Robert had been moving around the room. She said he was never where she left him when she woke up. She said she felt Robert's cloth hand on her throat while she slept. Light enough to leave no mark, but heavy enough to keep her from breathing. Every time her parents came rushing in, they found her huddled in a corner of the bed, and Robert sitting somewhere different from where they had placed him. The last time he was in the chair by the door. Break time equals 0. 5s/, facing the little girl, like a patient night watchman. Eventually, the doll was taken out of the house. People tried to remove him from their lives, the way people try to remove bad luck, by changing where it lives. But if such things are real, they have never belonged to one room alone. Years later, Robert was placed inside a glass case at Fort East Martello in Key West. People came to see him, the way they come to see a rumor that has survived longer than it should. Bold tourists laughed in front of him. Paranormal thrill seekers asked for a picture to bring home. Museum staff said that visitors who forgot to ask Robert's permission before taking photographs often found their cameras malfunctioning. Some returned to their hotels and heard scratching at the door all night. Some even mailed letters of apology to the doll after accidents or bouts of bad luck. Convinced that everything had started the moment they laughed at that motionless face behind the glass. No one could prove anything, but the letters kept coming. Letters asking forgiveness, pleas for bad luck to be lifted. Messy handwritten notes that said, "I didn't mean to disrespect you." Some people even claimed that in the photographs they managed to take, there was a small dark figure standing behind them, though they had visited the museum alone. In a quiet corner of the building, the longest-serving night staff member, an old man named Wilkes, kept an odd little ritual. Every evening before ending his shift, he stood in front of Robert's case, gave the slightest nod and said, "Good night." No one laughed at him for long. A few employees who skipped the ritual later said that that night they heard knocking from inside the exhibit room, even though the alarm system had never been triggered. One late summer night, when an offshore storm pushed humidity deep into the city, and the old fort smelled of salt and wet stone, a new museum employee named Clara was assigned to watch Robert's wing by herself. She had never believed the ghost stories surrounding the exhibit. To her, it was all psychology, myth-making, marketing, the usual museum trick of turning fear into ticket sales. Close to midnight, the lights in one hallway flickered, then steadied. Clara went room to room, checking the building. When she reached Robert's case, she stopped. A layer of fog had formed on the glass, as if someone had just breathed onto it from close range. She frowned and lifted her hand to wipe it away, then froze. There was writing on the fog. Not on the outside. The strokes had been made from within the glass. Jean is not the only one. Clara stood perfectly still. Her heart pounded so hard, it made her ears ring. She took a step back and hit a metal chair behind her, sending it screeching across the floor. When she looked up again, the glass was clear. Robert remained seated exactly as before, his head slightly angled, his blank black eyes staring ahead. Clara ran. The next morning, she returned with the museum manager. There was no trace of anything. The hallway camera footage for that night had glitched for exactly 17 minutes, beginning when Clara entered the gallery and ending when she fled it. No one could explain why. The manager suggested exhaustion, nerves, maybe panic. Clara resigned a week later. Before she left, she slipped an unsigned envelope into the desk drawer in the security office. Inside was a short handwritten note. "I do not know whether that doll is cursed. I do not know whether it is truly alive. But before I ran, I swear that what I saw in the glass was not my own reflection. There was a woman standing behind me. Her skin was very dark. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Robert, as though she were waiting to see whom he would choose next." The letter was never made public. Only a few longtime employees knew about it, and even they spoke of it only in hushed voices during late shifts. To this day, Robert still sits inside his glass case, as quiet as any other lifeless exhibit. During the day, tourists pass by, laugh, snap photos, and retell the stories about Jean Otto, the Eaton Street house, the mistreated servant, the curse, the frightened children who woke screaming in the night. But after the museum closes, when the old stone hallways sink into that thick stillness, broken only by the distant sound of the sea, no one dares say with certainty that the doll remains motionless. Because sometimes, if a person looks at him long enough through the glass, it begins to feel as though Robert is not looking out at all. He is looking past the visitor, into the darkness just over their shoulder, as though someone else is always standing there. Someone Jean once heard, someone and once feared, someone the little girl cried about in the middle of the night, someone the woman in Clara's reflection may never have truly left behind. People say every curse needs a vessel. But there is another possibility, far more frightening. Maybe Robert was never the source of the evil. Maybe he was only the first thing willing to sit still long enough for something ancient, patient, and always hungry to choose him as its face. And if that is true, then the glass case in the museum is not a prison. It is only a window,